The sun rose over the sprawling estate of Antonio Vega, casting a golden glow on the pristine white tents that dotted the manicured lawns. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of Antonio's life, his wedding day. At 35, the self-made millionaire had finally found the woman of his dreams, or so he thought. Caterers bustled about, arranging elaborate floral centerpieces and polishing crystal champagne flutes. The air was thick with the scent of roses and anticipation. In his private suite, Antonio adjusted his bow tie, his hands trembling slightly with excitement. He gazed at his reflection in the mirror, hardly believing that in just a few hours, he would be married to the beautiful Isabela Montero. "You look perfect, sir," his valet, Jorge, said with a smile. "Miss Isabela is a lucky woman." Antonio's lips curved into a confident grin. "No, my friend, I'm the lucky one." As he made his way down to greet the early arrivals, Antonio's mind wandered to the first time he met Isabela. It had been at a charity gala 6 months ago. She had walked into the room, a vision in emerald green, and every head had turned. But it wasn't just her stunning beauty that had captivated Antonio. It was the spark of intelligence in her eyes, the grace with which she carried herself, and the passionate way she spoke about her work with underprivileged children. From that moment on, Antonio had been smitten. Their whirlwind romance had been the talk of high society, splashed across the pages of every tabloid. The handsome, enigmatic millionaire and the kind-hearted beauty. It was a story straight out of a fairy tale. As guests began to arrive, Antonio greeted them with warm handshakes and broad smiles. His best friend and business partner, Carlos, clapped him on the back. "Nervous, my friend?" Carlos asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. Antonio laughed. "Not in the slightest. When you know, you know." But as the minutes ticked by and the ceremony drew nearer, a strange unease began to settle in Antonio's stomach. He chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters, but something felt off. "Sir," Jorge approached, his face pale. There's a problem." Antonio's heart skipped a beat. "What is it? Is Isabela all right?" Jorge swallowed hard. "Sir, Miss Isabela, she's gone." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "Her room is empty. Her dress is still there, but her personal belongings are missing. No one has seen her since last night." Antonio's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not to them. "Have you checked the grounds? Maybe she went for a walk to calm her nerves." Jorge shook his head. "We've looked everywhere, sir. Her car is missing from the garage." As the news spread, whispers rippled through the gathered guests. Antonio stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. Isabela, his beautiful, perfect Isabela, had vanished without a trace on their wedding day. Carlos gripped his friend's shoulder. "We'll find her, Antonio. I promise." But as the hours ticked by and there was no sign of Isabela, the whispers grew louder. Some guests speculated that she had gotten cold feet, others wondered if she had been kidnapped. The more salacious rumors suggested that she had run off with another man. Antonio refused to believe any of it. He knew Isabela. She wouldn't do this to him, to them. Something must have happened to her. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the now empty venue, Antonio sat alone in his study, his head in his hands. The table before him was strewn with pictures of Isabela, her radiant smile beaming up at him from glossy paper. How could this have happened? How could the happiest day of his life have turned into his worst nightmare? A soft knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. It was Maria, Isabela's maid of honor and closest friend. "Mr. Vega," she said hesitantly, I found something in Isabela's room. I think you should see it." With trembling hands, Maria handed Antonio a small, leather-bound journal. It was hidden in a secret compartment in her jewelry box. "I only found it because I was gathering her things." Antonio stared at the journal, his heart pounding. He had never seen it before, had no idea Isabela kept such a thing. With a deep breath, he opened it, and as he read the first page, his blood ran cold. "My dearest Antonio," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I couldn't go through with our wedding. I'm so sorry. There's so much you don't know, so much I've kept hidden. I never meant to hurt you, but the truth is, I'm not who you think I am." The words blurred as tears filled Antonio's eyes. Who was this woman he thought he knew so well? What secrets had she been keeping? As he continued to read, each word felt like a dagger to his heart. Isabela wrote of a past shrouded in mystery, of debts and dangerous connections. But most shockingly, she hinted at a connection to Antonio's own family, a connection that, if revealed, could destroy everything he had built. The final page of the journal contained a cryptic message. "The truth lies where the mountains touch the sky, where we shared our first kiss under a canopy of stars." Antonio's mind raced. He knew exactly where she meant, a remote cabin in the mountains where they had spent a romantic weekend early in their relationship. Could she be there now? Without a word to anyone, Antonio grabbed his car keys and rushed out of the house. As he sped down the winding roads towards the mountains, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, confusion, heartbreak, and a desperate hope that when he found Isabela, there would be an explanation for all of this. Little did Antonio know that the truth waiting for him at that cabin would shake the very foundations of his world, leaving him paralyzed in more ways than one. The woman he thought he knew, the life he thought he had, were about to be revealed as an intricate web of lies and secrets. And as the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Antonio Vega was racing towards a confrontation that would change his life forever. The winding mountain road stretched before Antonio like a serpent in the darkness, each curve bringing him closer to the truth he both craved and feared. The sleek sports car hugged the treacherous bends, its powerful engine echoing through the silent night. Inside, Antonio's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. As he drove, memories of Isabela flooded his consciousness. Her laughter, like tinkling bells on a summer breeze. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke of her dreams. The soft curves of her body pressed against his as they danced under the starlit sky. Had it all been a lie? A carefully constructed facade designed to ensnare him? The cabin loomed into view, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. Antonio's heart leapt into his throat as he saw a faint light flickering through the windows. She was here. With trembling hands, he cut the engine and stepped out into the cool mountain air. The crunch of gravel under his feet seemed deafening in the stillness of the night. As he approached the cabin, 1,000 scenarios played out in his mind. Would she be there, waiting to explain everything? Or had she left another cryptic message, leading him on a wild goose chase across the country? Antonio raised his hand to knock, then paused. Through the window, he could see a figure silhouetted against the firelight. The curve of her neck, the cascade of her hair, it was unmistakably Isabela. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. She turned at the sound, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. "Antonio," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, they stood frozen, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy between them. Then, like a dam breaking, emotions flooded forth. "How could you?" Antonio's voice cracked with anguish. "Our wedding day, Isabela. You left me standing there, humiliated, worried, sick. What could possibly justify this?" Isabela's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Antonio. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to fall in love with you." Her words hit him like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? Fall in love with me? Isabela, we've been in love for months. We were about to get married." She shook her head, her long dark hair swaying with the movement. "No, Antonio. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was never supposed to feel this way." Antonio's mind reeled. He stumbled to a nearby chair, sinking into it as the weight of her words threatened to crush him. "Explain," he demanded, his voice hoarse. "Explain everything, now." Isabela took a shaky breath, wringing her hands as she began to speak. "It all started 2 years ago. I was in a desperate situation. My father had fallen ill, and we couldn't afford his medical treatments. I was approached by a man who offered me a way out, a job that would pay enough to save my father's life." Antonio listened, his heart pounding, as Isabela unraveled a tale that seemed ripped from the pages of a thriller novel. She spoke of a shadowy organization, of powerful people pulling strings behind the scenes. And at the center of it all was a name that made Antonio's blood run cold, his own father, Alejandro Vega. "Your father hired me, Antonio," Isabela confessed, her voice barely audible. "He wanted me to get close to you, to influence your business decisions. He believed you were making choices that would harm the family empire he had built." The room spun around Antonio. His father, the man he had always looked up to, had orchestrated this elaborate deception? Had manipulated his very heart? But why? He choked out. Why go to such lengths? He could have just talked to me. Isabela shook her head sadly. "It wasn't that simple. Your father, he's involved in things, Antonio. Things that go beyond legitimate business. He needed someone he could control, someone who could guide you without raising suspicion." As Isabela continued to speak, Antonio's world crumbled around him. She told him of offshore accounts, of deals made in the shadows, of a network of corruption that stretched across continents. His father, the paragon of business acumen he had always admired, was nothing more than a glorified criminal. "And you," Antonio said, his voice hollow. "You were just a pawn in his game?" Isabela's eyes flashed with a mixture of pain and defiance. "At first, yes. But Antonio, you have to believe me. Somewhere along the way, it became real. My feelings for you, they're genuine. That's why I couldn't go through with the wedding. I couldn't bear to deceive you any longer." Antonio stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the cabin. His mind was a whirlwind of betrayal, confusion, and lingering affection. Despite everything, a part of him still yearned for Isabela, still saw the woman he had fallen in love with. "Why now?" he asked, turning to face her. "Why wait until our wedding day to reveal all this?" Isabela's face paled. "Because I received a warning. Someone within the organization, I don't know who, sent me a message. They said your father was planning to have me eliminated after the wedding. Once I had served my purpose, I would become a liability." The implications of her words hit Antonio like a physical blow. His own father, plotting murder? It seemed inconceivable, and yet, after everything he had learned tonight, he couldn't dismiss it outright. "We have to go to the authorities," Antonio said, his mind racing. "We have evidence, your testimony." "No." Isabela's voice was sharp with fear. "Antonio, you don't understand. Your father's reach is vast. The police, judges, even some government officials, many are in his pocket. If we go to the authorities, we're as good as dead." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. They were trapped, caught between the machinations of a powerful, corrupt man and the genuine feelings that had blossomed between them. As the night wore on, Antonio and Isabela talked, argued, and eventually formulated a plan. They would gather evidence, reach out to trusted contacts, and build a case that not even Alejandro Vega could wriggle out of. It would be dangerous, possibly even fatal, but it was the only way to ensure their safety and bring justice to those who had manipulated them. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the cabin windows, Antonio found himself looking at Isabela with new eyes. The woman before him was not the perfect, flawless bride he had thought he knew. She was flawed, complicated, with a past shrouded in secrets. And yet, as he watched her determination, her courage in the face of overwhelming odds, he realized that he might be falling in love with her all over again, this time, with the real Isabela. "What happens now?" Isabela asked softly, her hand tentatively reaching for his. Antonio intertwined his fingers with hers, feeling the familiar spark of connection. "Now, we fight back. Together." As they stepped out of the cabin into the crisp morning air, both knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger. They were about to take on one of the most powerful men in the country, a man who had no qualms about destroying lives to protect his empire. But as Antonio looked at Isabela, saw the mixture of fear and determination in her eyes, he felt a surge of hope. They had been brought together by lies and manipulation, but the bond they had forged was real. It would be that bond, that love, that would give them the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did they know that their decision to fight back would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of society, expose long-buried secrets, and test their love in ways they could never have imagined. As they drove down the mountain, leaving behind the cabin that had witnessed both the beginning of their love story and the revelation of its true nature. Antonio and Isabela were stepping into a world of danger, intrigue, and passion that would either solidify their bond. The sun rose over the mountains, casting a golden glow on the winding road ahead. It was a new day, the start of a new chapter in their tumultuous story. The wedding that never was had given way to a partnership forged in adversity, a love tested by fire. As they drove, Antonio's mind raced with the enormity of what lay ahead. He thought of his father, the man he had idolized for so long, now revealed as a master puppeteer pulling the strings of a vast criminal empire. How deep did the corruption go? How many lives had been affected by his father's machinations? Beside him, Isabela sat lost in her own thoughts. The weight of her deception still hung heavy on her shoulders, but there was also a sense of relief. For the first time since she had taken on this assignment, she felt truly free. The lies and half-truths that had clouded her interactions with Antonio had dissipated, leaving behind a raw, honest connection that felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. As they approached the city limits, Antonio broke the silence. "We can't go back to our old lives. It's not safe." Isabela nodded, her face set with determination. "I know. We need to disappear, at least for a while. Give ourselves time to gather evidence and build our case." Antonio's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I have a friend, someone I trust completely. He owns a small villa on a private island in the Caribbean. We can hide out there, use it as our base of operations." As they formulated their plan, both were acutely aware of the sacrifices they would have to make. Antonio would be walking away from his company, his fortune, everything he had worked so hard to build. Isabela would be cutting ties with her family, leaving them vulnerable to potential retaliation from Vega. But as they exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passed between them. The price was high, but the alternative, living under the thumb of a corrupt and dangerous man, was unthinkable. As the city skyline came into view, Antonio made a sudden decision. He pulled the car into the parking lot of a nondescript motel on the outskirts of town. "We need to ditch this car," he explained. "It's too easily traceable. We'll get a room, make some calls, and figure out our next move." As they checked in under false names, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were fugitives now, running from one of the most powerful men in the country. Every decision, every move they made from this point on could mean the difference between freedom and capture, or worse. In the dingy motel room, Antonio and Isabela set about erasing their digital footprints. Credit cards were cancelled, social media accounts deactivated, and burner phones purchased. As Isabela worked on disguising her appearance, dyeing her signature dark locks a nondescript brown, Antonio reached out to his trusted friend, setting their escape plan in motion. As night fell, they prepared to make their move. But just as they were about to leave the motel, Isabela's burner phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The contents made her blood run cold. "He knows," she whispered, showing the phone to Antonio. The message was brief but chilling. "The wolf is hunting. Run." With renewed urgency, they slipped out of the motel and into the night. As they made their way to the small private airfield where their escape plane waited, both were acutely aware that this was only the beginning. The real battle, the fight to expose the truth and bring down Vega's empire, was still to come. As the small plane took off into the star-studded sky, Antonio and Isabela held hands tightly. They were leaving behind a world of luxury and comfort, stepping into an uncertain future filled with danger and challenges. But as they looked at each other in the dim cabin light, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The plane banked, setting a course for the Caribbean and the temporary safety of the private island. But even as they flew towards their sanctuary, both Antonio and Isabela knew that this was merely the eye of the storm. The real tempest, a battle that would test their love, their courage, and their very survival, was still to come. The small plane touched down on a pristine strip of sand, its engines quieting to a low hum as it rolled to a stop. Antonio and Isabela stepped out into the balmy Caribbean air, their eyes squinting against the brilliant sunshine. Before them stretched a paradise of swaying palms and crystal-clear waters, but neither could fully appreciate the beauty. Their minds were consumed by the dangerous game they had unwittingly become a part of. Antonio's friend, Marco, greeted them at the small airstrip. His usually jovial face was creased with concern. "Welcome to Isla Esmeralda," he said, ushering them quickly towards a waiting jeep. "We need to move fast. I'm not sure how long this place will remain secret." As they bumped along a dirt road towards the villa, Marco filled them in on the latest developments. "Your disappearance has caused quite a stir, Antonio. Your father has publicly announced that you've had a nervous breakdown and are receiving treatment at a private facility. He's taken temporary control of your company." Antonio's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. The audacity of his father's lies knew no bounds. Beside him, Isabela placed a comforting hand on his arm, her touch a silent reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. The villa, when they arrived, was a stunning blend of modern luxury and tropical charm. Under different circumstances, it would have been the perfect honeymoon retreat. Now, it would serve as their war room, the base from which they would launch their counterattack against Alejandro Vega's empire of corruption. As night fell, Antonio, Isabela, and Marco gathered on the terrace, the sound of crashing waves a constant backdrop to their tense conversation. Marco, it turned out, was more than just a wealthy friend with a private island. He was a former intelligence operative with connections that spanned the globe. "Your father's reach is vast," Marco explained, spreading out a series of documents on the table. "He's got his fingers in everything from real estate to technology firms. But his real power comes from his control over key politicians and judges. He's been building this network for decades." Isabela leaned forward, her eyes scanning the papers. "This is incredible, Marco. How did you get all this information?" Marco's face darkened. "Let's just say I've had my suspicions about Alejandro for a long time. When Antonio reached out to me, I knew it was time to put all the pieces together." As they pored over the documents, a picture began to emerge of a criminal empire so vast and intricate that it seemed almost impossible to dismantle. Politicians, judges, business leaders, all were caught in Alejandro Vega's web of corruption and blackmail. "We need more," Antonio said, frustration evident in his voice. "This is all circumstantial. We need hard evidence if we're going to bring him down." Marco nodded gravely. "I agree. And I think I know where we might find it." He pulled out a map, pointing to a location in the heart of the city they had just fled. "Your father's primary base of operations. If there's concrete evidence of his crimes, it'll be there." Isabela gasped. "But that's suicide. The place will be crawling with security. How could we possibly get in?" A sly smile crept across Marco's face. "With a little help from an old friend." He pulled out his phone, dialing a number from memory. "It's time to call in a favor." As Marco stepped away to make his call, Antonio and Isabela found themselves alone for the first time since their arrival on the island. The weight of their situation hung heavy between them, unspoken questions and fears filling the air. "Are you okay?" Antonio asked softly, reaching out to take Isabela's hand. She gave him a wan smile. "I'm scared, Antonio. Not just for us, but for my family. If your father discovers their whereabouts." Antonio pulled her close, wrapping her in a protective embrace. "We won't let that happen. I promise you, we'll find a way to keep them safe." As they stood there, the warm Caribbean breeze caressing their skin, Antonio was struck by the absurdity of their situation. Just days ago, they had been preparing to exchange vows, to start a life together built on what he thought was a solid foundation of love and trust. Now, they were fugitives, bound together by secrets and danger. And yet, as he held Isabela in his arms, feeling the beat of her heart against his chest, Antonio realized that their bond had only grown stronger. The woman in his arms was not the perfect, polished socialite he had thought he was marrying. She was complex, flawed, with a past shrouded in secrets. But she was also brave, resilient, and fiercely loyal. In the face of overwhelming odds, she had chosen to stand by him, to fight alongside him against the very man who had brought them together. Their moment of peace was interrupted by Marco's return. His face was alight with excitement. "I've got good news," he announced. "My contact has agreed to help us." She's an expert in covert operations and has experience infiltrating high-security facilities. She? Isabela asked, a hint of something, jealousy, coloring her voice. Marco's grin widened. Oh yes. You're going to love her. She's quite unforgettable. As if on cue, the sound of a helicopter broke through the night air. They rushed to the beach, watching as a sleek black chopper descended onto the sand. As the rotors slowed, a figure emerged, tall, lithe, with a shock of platinum blonde hair. Hello, darlings, the woman called out, her voice a husky purr. I hear you're in need of my particular set of skills. Antonio felt Isabela stiffen beside him. He turned to see her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Isabela? He asked, concerned. What's wrong? Isabela's voice was barely a whisper. It can't be. Sophia? The blonde woman sauntered towards them, a predatory smile playing on her lips. Hello, little sister. Long time no see. The revelation hit Antonio like a physical blow. Sister? Isabela had never mentioned having a sister, let alone one who was apparently some kind of covert operative. He turned to Isabela, questions burning in his eyes, but she was focused entirely on the newcomer. What are you doing here, Sophia? Isabela's voice was tight with emotion, fear, anger, and something else Antonio couldn't quite place. Sophia's laugh was like tinkling glass. Why, I'm here to help, of course. Marco called in a favor, and well, how could I resist the chance to see my baby sister again? Especially given the circumstances. Marco cleared his throat, clearly sensing the tension. Perhaps we should take this inside. We have a lot to discuss, and time is of the essence. As they made their way back to the villa, Antonio's mind was reeling. Just when he thought he had a handle on the situation, this new development had thrown everything into chaos once again. He watched Isabela closely, noting the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her eyes darted nervously between Sophia and himself. Once inside, Sophia wasted no time getting down to business. She spread out a series of blueprints on the table, her demeanor shifting from playful to intensely focused. Alejandro Vega's compound is one of the most secure facilities I've ever seen, she began. Multiple layers of security, state-of-the-art surveillance systems, and a small army of highly trained guards. Getting in undetected will be challenging, to say the least. As Sophia detailed her plan, a daring infiltration that would require split-second timing and nerves of steel, Antonio found his attention divided. Part of him was absorbing the information, recognizing the brilliance of the strategy. But another part was acutely aware of the undercurrents of tension in the room. Isabela sat rigid in her chair, her eyes never leaving Sophia. There was a history there, Antonio realized, one that went far beyond simple sibling rivalry. What secrets lay in their shared past? And how would those secrets impact their dangerous mission? As the night wore on and plans were refined, Antonio found moments to observe the sisters' interactions. Sophia was all easy charm and confidence, her movements graceful and deliberate. Isabela, by contrast, seemed to shrink in her presence, her usual poise replaced by a nervous energy. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, when Sophia and Marco had retired to their respective rooms, that Antonio finally had a moment alone with Isabela. They stood on the terrace, the first hints of dawn painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Why didn't you tell me you had a sister? Antonio asked softly, careful to keep any accusation out of his voice. Isabela sighed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Sophia and I, we haven't spoken in years. There's so much you don't know, Antonio. So much I've tried to forget. Antonio took her hand, gently turning her to face him. Then tell me, no more secrets, remember? Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Tears glistened in Isabela's eyes as she began to speak. The story that unfolded was one of betrayal, heartbreak, and a family torn apart by ambition and deceit. Sophia, it turned out, had been the golden child, brilliant, charismatic, and utterly ruthless in her pursuit of success. She had left home at 18, cutting all ties with her family to pursue a life of adventure and danger. I idolized her, Isabela admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to be just like her. But then, she trailed off, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. Antonio pulled her close, offering silent comfort as she fought to regain her composure. Sophia got involved with some dangerous people, Isabela continued. She came home one night, terrified. She begged our parents for help, for money to pay off some debt. But when they refused, she stole everything. Our family's savings, my college fund, even my mother's wedding ring. She disappeared, and we didn't hear from her for years. Antonio's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with the confident, capable woman who had swept onto the island just hours ago. And now she's here to help us? Isabela shook her head, confusion evident in her eyes. I don't understand it, Antonio. The sister I knew would never do something like this out of the goodness of her heart. She always has an angle, always. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting its warm light over the island paradise, Antonio and Isabela stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The mission ahead was daunting enough, but now they had to contend with this new wildcard, a woman from Isabela's past whose true motives remained a mystery. Whatever Sophia's reasons for being here, Antonio said finally, we have to stay focused on our goal. We need to get that evidence against my father. It's the only way to ensure our safety and bring him to justice. Isabela nodded, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for battle. You're right. We can't let personal feelings interfere. There's too much at stake. As they made their way back inside to join the others for a final briefing, Antonio couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complicated than they had initially realized. The web of lies, betrayal, and hidden agendas seemed to grow more intricate with each passing hour. Little did they know that the true test of their love, their loyalty, and their very survival was yet to come. As they prepared to infiltrate Alejandro Vega's fortress-like compound, forces were already in motion that would push them to their limits and force them to confront truths about themselves and each other that they never could have imagined. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change their lives forever. In the heart of the city they had fled, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Antonio and Isabela would soon face challenges that would either solidify their bond or shatter it beyond repair. And through it all, the enigmatic Sophia would play a role that none of them could have anticipated, a role that would leave them all questioning everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the true nature of good in. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the sprawling compound that housed Alejandro Vega's empire. From their vantage point in a nearby abandoned building, Antonio, Isabela, Sophia, and Marco surveyed the fortress-like structure, its walls bristling with security cameras and motion sensors. Are you sure about this? Antonio whispered, his eyes never leaving the compound. The plan they had concocted was daring to the point of recklessness, but it was their only shot at obtaining the evidence they needed. Sophia's lips curled into a confident smirk. Relax, lover boy. I've broken into places twice as secure as this with half the preparation. Just stick to the plan, and we'll be in and out before they know what hit them. Isabela bristled at Sophia's casual tone, her fingers tightening around the high-tech tablet she held. Her role was to monitor the security systems and guide the infiltration team through the compound's labyrinthine corridors. It was a task that required absolute focus, something that was proving increasingly difficult with her estranged sister's constant needling. Marco finished his final equipment check, his face a mask of professional detachment. Comms check, he said, activating the tiny earpieces they all wore. Everyone online? A chorus of affirmatives rang out, and with a final nod, the mission was a go. Sophia and Marco slipped into the shadows, their black tactical gear rendering them nearly invisible in the darkness. Antonio hung back with Isabela, his hand finding hers in a brief, reassuring squeeze. Be careful, Isabela whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. Antonio nodded, his jaw set with resolve. I will. And Isabela, I love you. No matter what happens in there, remember that. Before she could respond, he was gone, melting into the night to join the others. Isabela took a deep breath, pushing down the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. There would be time for declarations of love later. Right now, she had a job to do. The infiltration began smoothly, with Isabela's expert guidance. the team bypassed the outer security perimeter without raising any alarms. Sophia's intel proved accurate, and they found themselves inside the main building with relative ease. "We're in," Marco's voice crackled over the comms. "Heading for the main server room now." Isabela's fingers flew over her tablet, disabling security cameras and rerouting patrols to clear their path. But as they neared their objective, a niggling sense of unease began to grow in the pit of her stomach. It was all going too smoothly. Her suspicions were confirmed moments later when a shrill alarm shattered the night's silence. "We've been made," Sophia's voice rang out, tinged with a hint of excitement that sent chills down Isabela's spine. "Heading to extraction point Beta. Get ready for some fireworks, baby sis." Isabela's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold on her screens. Guards were converging on their position from all directions, and she could see Antonio and Marco fighting their way through, trying to reach the extraction point. But where was Sophia? A movement on one of the security feeds caught Isabela's eye. She zoomed in, her blood running cold at what she saw. Sophia wasn't heading for the extraction point at all. Instead, she was making her way deeper into the compound, towards a heavily secured area that hadn't been part of their original plan. "Sophia, what are you doing?" Isabela hissed into her comm. "The extraction point is in the opposite direction." Sophia's laugh crackled through the earpiece. "Oh, Izzy, did you really think I came all this way just to help you and your boy toy? I've got bigger fish to fry." The realization hit Isabela like a physical blow. They'd been played. Sophia had used their mission as cover for her own agenda, whatever that might be. "Antonio, Marco," Isabela called out urgently, "Sophia's gone rogue. You need to get out of there now." But it was too late. On her screens, Isabela watched in horror as Antonio and Marco were surrounded, forced to their knees at gunpoint. And then, emerging from the shadows like a specter, came the imposing figure of Alejandro Vega himself. Well, Alejandro's voice boomed through the compound's PA system, which Isabela had tapped into. "What do we have here? My wayward son and his little band of thieves. I must say, I'm disappointed, Antonio. I thought I taught you better than this." Antonio's voice, filled with defiance, came through clearly despite the chaos. "You taught me to be a ruthless businessman, father. You never taught me to be a good man. That, I had to learn on my own." Alejandro's laugh was cold and mirthless. "And look where it's gotten you. On your knees, at my mercy. Was it worth it, my son? Throwing away everything for this girl?" Before Antonio could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, Sophia's. Now, Alejandro. Is that any way to talk about your future daughter-in-law?" All eyes turned to Sophia as she sauntered into view, a sleek metal briefcase clutched in her hand. She moved with the confidence of someone who held all the cards, and Isabela felt her stomach drop. Whatever game Sophia was playing, it was clear she was several moves ahead of them all. "Ah, Sophia," Alejandro said, his tone suddenly cordial. "I trust you have what we discussed." Sophia patted the briefcase with a smirk. "All here, just as promised. Now, about our deal." Isabela watched the scene unfold with growing horror. Her sister, it seemed, had been working with Alejandro all along. But to what end? As if reading her thoughts, Sophia turned to face one of the security cameras, her eyes seeming to bore directly into Isabela's soul. "Sorry, little sis. It's nothing personal, just business." With those words, Sophia opened the briefcase, revealing its contents to Alejandro. From her vantage point, Isabela couldn't see what was inside, but the look of triumph on Alejandro's face told her all she needed to know. Whatever Sophia had delivered, it was big. "Excellent work, my dear," Alejandro purred, closing the briefcase with a decisive snap. "You've more than earned your reward. As for you," he turned back to Antonio and Marco, his expression hardening, "I'm afraid your little adventure ends here." Isabela's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out of this nightmare. She had access to the compound's systems, but what could she do? Any wrong move could put Antonio and Marco in even greater danger. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a new voice crackled to life in her earpiece, one she didn't recognize. "Ms. Montero," the voice said, calm and authoritative. This is Agent Rodriguez of Interpol. We've been monitoring your operation and are prepared to intervene. But we need your help. Isabela's heart leapt. Help was at hand, but could she trust this mysterious voice? With Antonio's life hanging in the balance, did she have any choice? What do you need me to do? She whispered, her fingers poised over her tablet. We need a distraction, Agent Rodriguez replied. Something big enough to throw the compound into chaos and give our teams time to move in. Can you do that? Isabela's mind whirled with possibilities. She had control over the compound's systems, security, power, even the fire suppression systems. With the right combination, I can do it, she said, a newfound determination stealing her voice. But I'll need a few minutes to set it up. You have two, Rodriguez replied. Make them count. As Isabela's fingers flew over her tablet, orchestrating what she hoped would be a big enough distraction, the scene in the compound continued to unfold. Alejandro was gloating now, outlining his plans for Antonio's future. A future that, it was clear, did not include Isabela or any notion of freedom. You'll see, my son, Alejandro was saying, his voice dripping with false paternalism. In time, you'll understand that everything I've done has been for your own good. For the good of our family. Antonio's response was filled with a quiet fury that made Isabela's heart swell with pride and love. We stopped being a family the moment you decided your empire was more important than your son's happiness. Alejandro's face darkened with rage, his hand raising as if to strike Antonio. But before he could, all hell broke loose. In a carefully orchestrated sequence, Isabela triggered a cascade of system failures throughout the compound. Lights flickered and died, plunging sections into darkness. Sprinkler systems activated, drenching guards and shorting out equipment. And in the confusion, the perimeter alarms began to blare, signaling a breach that didn't yet exist but soon would. Through her monitors, Isabela watched as chaos engulfed the compound. Guards rushed to respond to phantom intruders, leaving Antonio and Marco momentarily unguarded. It was the opening they needed. In a flash, Antonio was on his feet, tackling Alejandro to the ground. Marco engaged the nearest guards, his years of training evident in every fluid movement. And Sophia stood watching the mayhem with an amused smirk, making no move to help either side. Interpol teams are moving in, Agent Rodriguez's voice came through Isabela's earpiece. Tell your people to head for the north exit. We'll cover their escape. Isabela relayed the instructions, her heart pounding as she watched Antonio and Marco fight their way through the compound. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but desperation lent them strength. As they neared the north exit, a new figure entered Isabela's field of view. Sophia, moving with cat-like grace through the chaos, the metal briefcase still clutched in her hand. Sophia, Isabela called out over the comms. Whatever you're planning, it's over. Interpol is here. Come with Antonio and Marco. Please. For a moment, Sophia hesitated, her eyes finding a security camera and seeming to look directly at Isabela. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Regret? Affection? But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Sorry, Izzy, Sophia said, her voice surprisingly gentle. But I've got a plane to catch. Take care of yourself, little sister. And, I'm sorry, for everything. With those words, Sophia disappeared into the night, leaving Isabela with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. But there was no time to dwell on her sister's betrayal. Antonio and Marco were almost at the exit. As they burst through the door into the cool night air, they were met by a team of heavily armed Interpol agents. In the distance, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Ms. Montero, Agent Rodriguez's voice came through one last time. Our teams have secured the compound and apprehended Alejandro Vega. Your friends are safe. You did good work today. Isabela sagged with relief, tears streaming down her face as the tension of the past hours finally released. It was over. They had won. But as she watched Antonio being led to safety, saw the look of mixture of relief and disbelief on his face, Isabela knew that in many ways, their ordeal was just beginning. Alejandro's empire might be crumbling, but the repercussions of this night would echo for years to come. And somewhere out there, Sophia was in the wind, carrying with her secrets that could shake the foundations of their world once again. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Isabela packed up her equipment and stepped out of her hiding place. It was time to face the new day, and whatever challenges it might bring. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she faced that future with hope. Antonio was safe, Alejandro was in custody, and she had proven to herself and to the world that she was more than just a pretty face or a pawn in someone else's game. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman capable of bringing down empires and saving those she loved. As she made her way towards the flashing lights and the promise of reunion with Antonio, Isabela allowed herself a small smile. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that, she realized, was all that truly mattered. The sun had fully risen by the time Isabela reached the perimeter of what had once been Alejandro Vega's impenetrable fortress. The compound was now a hive of activity, swarming with Interpol agents, local law enforcement, and a growing crowd of journalists eager for a glimpse of the fallen titan of industry. Isabela's eyes scanned the chaotic scene, searching desperately for the one face she longed to see. And then, amid the sea of uniforms and flashing cameras, she saw him. Antonio stood next to an ambulance, a blanket draped over his shoulders, his face smudged with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. Without conscious thought, Isabela began to run, pushing past startled agents and reporters. Antonio moved to meet her, shrugging off the blanket and the paramedic who had been tending to a cut on his forehead. They collided in a fierce embrace, clinging to each other as if afraid the other might disappear if they let go. Isabela buried her face in Antonio's chest, inhaling his scent, a mixture of sweat, smoke, and that uniquely Antonio essence that had become home to her. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're really okay." Antonio's arms tightened around her, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. "Thanks to you," he murmured into her hair. "Isabela, what you did, it was incredible. You saved us all." She pulled back slightly, searching his face. The events of the past few hours felt surreal, like a fever dream. "Is it really over?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. Antonio's expression darkened slightly. "My father is in custody. His empire is crumbling as we speak. But Sophia got away," Isabela finished for him, the reality of her sister's betrayal hitting her anew. Antonio nodded grimly. "With whatever was in that briefcase. Isabela, I'm so sorry. I know how much you wanted to believe in her." Isabela swallowed hard, pushing down the tide of conflicting emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. There would be time to process Sophia's actions later. For now, she needed to focus on the present. "Mr. Vega, Ms. Montero," an authoritative voice interrupted their reunion. They turned to see a tall, distinguished-looking man approaching, flanked by two Interpol agents. "I'm Agent Rodriguez. We spoke earlier, Ms. Montero. I'm afraid I'm going to need to ask you both some questions." The next few hours passed in a blur of debriefings, medical checkups, and hurried phone calls to lawyers. Antonio and Isabela were separated for questioning, each giving their account of the events that had led to this moment. Through it all, Isabela couldn't shake the feeling of unreality, as if at any moment she might wake up and find herself back on that Caribbean island, planning an impossible heist. It was late afternoon by the time they were finally released. As they stepped out of the temporary Interpol headquarters that had been set up near the compound, they were immediately accosted by a wall of journalists, all clamoring for a statement. "Mr. Vega, how does it feel to bring down your own father's criminal empire?" "Ms. Montero, is it true that you were working undercover for Interpol all along?" "Antonio, Isabela, will you be rescheduling your wedding now that the truth has come out?" Antonio's arm tightened protectively around Isabela's waist as he guided her through the crowd towards a waiting car. "No comment," he repeated firmly, shielding her from the grasping hands and flashing cameras. Once safely inside the vehicle, Isabela let out a shaky breath. "Where are we going?" she asked, realizing she had no idea what came next. Her old life felt like a distant memory, and the future stretched before her, uncertain and daunting. Antonio took her hand, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her palm. "Somewhere safe," he assured her. "I have a penthouse in the city that not even my father knew about. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." As the car wove through the city streets, Isabela found herself staring out the window, watching the familiar skyline pass by. It felt strange to be back in the heart of the city they had fled just days ago, now returning as, what? Heroes? Victims? Something in between? The penthouse, when they arrived, was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Sleek, modern, and blessedly quiet, it felt like stepping into another world entirely. As soon as the door closed behind them, Isabela felt the last of her adrenaline drain away, leaving her exhausted to her very bones. Antonio seemed to sense her fatigue. Without a word, he led her to the master bathroom, where a massive tub dominated the space. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said softly, already turning on the taps and adding a generous pour of bath oil. As Isabela sank into the warm, fragrant water, she felt the tension of the past days begin to melt away. Antonio perched on the edge of the tub, gently washing away the grime and fear that seemed to have seeped into her very pores. "Talk to me," he urged softly. "What's going on in that brilliant mind of yours?" Isabela closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the water and Antonio's tender ministrations wash over her. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Everything's changed, Antonio. Your father, my sister. I feel like I don't know what's real anymore." Antonio's hand stilled for a moment before resuming its gentle cleansing. "I know exactly how you feel," he said, his voice tinged with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "The man I thought my father was, he never really existed. And now, I have to figure out who I am without his shadow looming over me." Isabela opened her eyes, reaching out to cup Antonio's cheek. "You're the man I fell in love with," she said fiercely. "The man who was willing to give up everything to do what was right. That's who you are, Antonio. With or without your father's legacy." A ghost of a smile played on Antonio's lips. "And you," he said, leaning into her touch, "are the most incredible, brave, and brilliant woman I've ever known. Isabela, what you did back there. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough." She shook her head, water droplets flying from her damp hair. "We did it together," she insisted. "All of us. Even Sophia, in her own way." At the mention of her sister's name, Isabela felt a fresh wave of pain wash over her. Sophia's betrayal cut deep, reopening old wounds that had never fully healed. Antonio seemed to sense the shift in her mood. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked gently. "About Sophia?" Isabela was quiet for a long moment, sorting through the tangle of emotions that surrounded her relationship with her sister. "I don't know what to think," she admitted finally. "Part of me is so angry I can barely breathe. But another part. Antonio, you didn't see her face at the end. For a moment, I thought I saw the sister I used to know. The one who protected me, who made me laugh. What if she had a reason for what she did?" Antonio's expression was troubled. "Isabela, I know you want to believe the best of your sister. But we can't ignore the facts. She betrayed us, handed something valuable over to my father, and then disappeared. Whatever her reasons, she made her choice." Isabela nodded, knowing Antonio was right but unable to completely let go of the hope that there was more to Sophia's actions than met the eye. "I just wish I understood why," she said softly. "Why any of this happened. Why your father did what he did. Why Sophia got involved. It all seems so senseless." Antonio helped her out of the tub, wrapping her in a plush towel. "I don't know if we'll ever have all the answers," he said, leading her to the bedroom. "But what I do know is that we have each other. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they settled into bed, exhaustion finally overtaking them, Isabela found herself clinging to Antonio, seeking comfort in his solid presence. Despite the luxury surrounding them, despite the knowledge that they had emerged victorious from their ordeal, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before an even greater storm. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings, press conferences, and hushed strategy sessions. Antonio worked tirelessly to distance himself from his father's crimes while simultaneously trying to salvage what he could of the legitimate parts of the Vega Empire. Isabela, for her part, found herself thrust into the spotlight as the media latched onto the story of the bride-turned-heroine who had brought down one of the country's most powerful men. Through it all, they clung to each other, finding strength in their bond even as the world around them seemed to spin out of control. But as the dust began to settle and the full implications of their actions became clear, new challenges emerged. 1 week after Alejandro's arrest, Antonio and Isabela sat in a meeting with their legal team, going over the latest developments in the case. The news was not good. "I'm afraid the prosecution is considering bringing charges against you as well," Ms. Montero, their lead lawyer, a stern-faced woman named Camilla, explained. "They're arguing that your initial involvement with Mr. Vega Sr. makes you an accessory to some of his crimes." Isabela felt the blood drain from her face. "But that's ridiculous," Antonio protested, his hand finding Isabela's under the table. "She's the one who helped bring him down." Camilla held up a hand, silencing Antonio's outburst. "I agree, and we'll fight it with everything we have. But you need to be prepared for the possibility of a lengthy legal battle. The prosecution is under immense pressure to make an example of everyone involved in this case, no matter how tangentially." As the meeting continued, outlining potential strategies and worst-case scenarios, Isabela found her mind wandering. She thought of Sofia, out there somewhere with her stolen secrets. She thought of Alejandro, sitting in a cell, his empire crumbling around him. And she thought of the life she and Antonio had imagined for themselves, now seeming further away than ever. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out over the glittering city skyline, Isabela voiced the fear that had been growing in her heart. "What if it was all for nothing, Antonio?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if, after everything we've been through, we still lose everything?" Antonio turned to her, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "Listen to me, Isabela," he said, taking her face in his hands. "No matter what happens, no matter what they throw at us, we will not lose. You know why? Because we have the truth on our side. And more importantly, we have each other." As he pulled her into a passionate kiss, Isabela felt a glimmer of the hope she had been missing. Antonio was right. They had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. But even as she lost herself in Antonio's embrace, a small part of Isabela couldn't help but wonder, was this really the end of their ordeal? Or merely the beginning of an even greater battle? Across the city, in a nondescript hotel room, Sofia Montero sat bathed in the blue light of a laptop screen. The contents of the mysterious briefcase were spread out before her: documents, flash drives, and a single photograph that seemed to hold the key to everything. As she pored over the information, a slow smile spread across her face. "Oh, Izzy," she murmured to herself. "If you only knew what was really going on. But don't worry, little sister. Soon, everything will become clear." With a decisive click, Sofia sent an encrypted message, setting in motion a chain of events that would once again turn Antonio and Isabela's world upside down. The real game, it seemed, was only just beginning. The courtroom was packed to capacity. A sea of eager faces turned towards the front where Isabela Montero sat, her posture rigid, her face a mask of calm determination. Beside her, Antonio Vega clutched her hand, his knuckles white with tension. This was it, the moment that would determine their fate. 3 months had passed since Alejandro Vega's empire had come crashing down, and in that time, Antonio and Isabela's lives had been a whirlwind of legal battles, media scrutiny, and personal revelations. The prosecution had made good on their threat, charging Isabela as an accessory to Alejandro's crimes. The trial had been long and grueling, with every aspect of their lives laid bare for the world to see. As the jury filed in, Isabela felt her heart hammering in her chest. She thought back to the night before, when she and Antonio had stood on the balcony of their penthouse, looking out over the city they had nearly lost everything to protect. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Antonio had said, pulling her close, "remember that I love you. No verdict can change that." Now, as the foreman stood to deliver the jury's decision, Isabela clung to that memory, to the warmth of Antonio's love that had sustained her through this ordeal. In the case of the people versus Isabela Montero, on the charge of accessory to racketeering, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Journalists scrambled for their phones, spectators burst into applause, and Isabela felt herself engulfed in Antonio's embrace. Tears streamed down her face as the reality of the verdict sank in. She was free. They were free. But even as they celebrated their victory, a new crisis was unfolding across the city. In a secure government facility, alarms blared as officials discovered a massive data breach. Highly classified information had been stolen, and all signs pointed to one culprit, Isabela Montero. As Antonio and Isabela emerged from the courthouse, blinking in the bright sunlight and facing a wall of cameras and microphones, they were unaware of the storm that was about to break over their heads once again. It was later that evening, as they were celebrating their legal victory with a small gathering of friends at the penthouse, that the other shoe dropped. Marco burst into the room, his face pale, clutching a tablet. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's all over the news." The room fell silent as Marco pulled up a live news broadcast. The anchor's voice filled the space, her tone grave. In a shocking turn of events, classified documents leaked earlier today reveal a conspiracy that goes far beyond the crimes of Alejandro Vega. Evidence suggests that a shadow organization, comprised of high-ranking government officials and business leaders, has been manipulating global markets and political systems for decades. And at the center of this web of deceit? None other than Isabela Montero, sister of recently acquitted Isabela Montero. Isabela felt the room spin around her. She gripped the back of a chair for support, her mind reeling. Sofia? At the center of a global conspiracy? It seemed impossible, and yet. The news anchor continued, her words hammering home the gravity of the situation. Perhaps most shocking of all are the allegations that Alejandro Vega's arrest was merely a smokescreen, orchestrated by this shadow organization to divert attention from their true activities. If these documents are to be believed, the real power players are still at large, their identities protected by layers of secrecy and misdirection. As the implications of this revelation sank in, Antonio and Isabela exchanged a look of dawning horror. Everything they had been through, everything they had fought for, had it all been part of some larger, more sinister plan? Their moment of shocked silence was broken by the shrill ring of Isabela's phone. With trembling hands, she answered it, putting it on speaker. "Hello, little sister," Sofia's voice purred through the speaker. "Surprise." "Sofia," Isabela breathed, a mixture of relief and fury coloring her tone. "What have you done?" Sofia's laugh was tinged with a hint of madness. "What have I done? Oh, Izzy, I've changed the game. Everything you think you know, everything you think you've accomplished, it's all been part of a much bigger picture." Antonio leaned in, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "Why, Sofia, why drag us into this twisted game of yours?" "Because, my dear almost brother-in-law," Sofia replied, her voice dripping with condescension, "you and Isabela were the perfect pawns. Your love story, your fight against injustice, it was the perfect distraction. While the world was focused on the fall of Alejandro Vega, the real work was happening in the shadows." Isabela felt sick. "The briefcase," she said, realization dawning. "The one you took from Alejandro's compound. What was really in it?" "The key," Sofia said simply. "The key to unlocking secrets that will reshape the world as we know it. But don't worry, little sister. Your part in this story isn't over yet. In fact, it's only just beginning." Before either Antonio or Isabela could respond, the line went dead. They stood in stunned silence, the magnitude of Sofia's revelation washing over them. It was Marco who finally broke the silence. "We need to go," he said urgently. "If what Sofia's saying is true, nowhere is safe. We need to disappear, regroup, figure out our next move." As if on cue, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Through the penthouse windows, they could see a fleet of black SUVs converging on the building. "She set us up," Antonio realized, his voice hollow. "This whole thing, the trial, the acquittal, it was all to put us exactly where they wanted us." There was no time for recriminations or regrets. In a flurry of activity, they grabbed what essentials they could. erased their digital footprints, and made their way to the building's hidden emergency exit. As they emerged into the cool night air, slipping away just as government agents stormed the penthouse, Isabela felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Once again, they were on the run. Once again, the future was uncertain. But this time was different. This time, they knew the true scale of what they were up against. And this time, they were determined not just to survive, but to fight back. In the weeks that followed, Antonio and Isabela went deep underground, using every resource and contact at their disposal to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. They gathered allies, investigative journalists, ethical hackers, disillusioned government agents, slowly building a resistance against the shadow organization that Sophia had revealed. Their love, tested by fire and betrayal, grew stronger in the face of adversity. In stolen moments between strategy sessions and narrow escapes, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to the truth. It was during one such moment, as they stood on the balcony of a safe house overlooking an unfamiliar city skyline, that Antonio turned to Isabela, his eyes shining with determination. "Marry me," he said, not for the first time, but with a new urgency. "Not for show, not as part of some grand plan. Marry me because in this crazy, dangerous world, you're the one thing I'm sure of." Isabela's answer was a fierce kiss, a promise sealed under a canopy of stars. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As dawn broke on a new day, Antonio and Isabela stood hand in hand, ready to take on the world. The path ahead was fraught with danger, the odds stacked against them. But they had each other, and they had the truth on their side. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since this whirlwind had begun, Isabela felt truly hopeful. Sophia may have thought she was several moves ahead, but she had underestimated one crucial factor: the power of true love, and the lengths two people would go to protect it. As they set out to unravel the conspiracy that had upended their lives, Antonio and Isabela knew that their story was far from over. But whatever twists and turns lay ahead, they would face them together, their love a beacon of hope in a world of shadows. The game had changed, the stakes higher than ever before. But Antonio and Isabela were ready. After all, they had already survived the impossible. What was one more challenge in the face of a love that had conquered all? And so, as the sun rose on a new chapter of their lives, Antonio and Isabela stepped forward into the unknown, ready to fight for their love, for justice, and for the truth that lay hidden in the heart of a global conspiracy. Their story, it seemed, was only just beginning.